Hello, Imperfect Leaders. It's summer! And for leaders, that means reflection. And it means planning for the coming year. It is for that reason that this week's episode is an encore episode specifically picked with your upcoming year in mind. And then as Labor Day approaches, Season 3 will kick off. And I'm so excited about that because Jamie Almanzán from the Equity Collaborative is going to be joining me as a co-host and commentator. It is going to be great. So sit back and enjoy this encore presentation of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. At the end of every interview that we have for teacher candidates, we will say, "What questions do you have for us?" And they will always ask, "Well, what kind of support can I expect?" And we will always say, "Well, don't worry, we'll give you a mentor." But it's not real mentorship. I mean, it's support with the difficult kid or the field trip form or the grade card, but it isn't coaching. That's where partners like EdConnective step in. They provide observation and feedback with practice. That's real coaching. Their mission is to ensure that every student thrives by facilitating exceptional educator growth. So whether it's science of reading, whether it's leadership development, whether you're trying to build the best recruitment and retention efforts, check out edconnective.com. On August 29, 2005, Hurricane Katrina, a Category 3 hurricane with recorded wind speeds of 140 miles per hour, devastated communities in Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And I remember being a teacher in Missouri and hearing reports of families heading north to find refuge all along the Mississippi River. Our school system welcomed families and quickly learned of their very specific needs. The children had been through a great deal of trauma. What I didn't know until now was that after Katrina, in 2014, the New Orleans Public Schools transitioned from a traditional school district to a 100% charter school district. The superintendent would be hired by a school board, and it would be their responsibility to oversee and authorize each charter school, working with each charter school's own school boards. What a task. My guest this week describes that important work. Dr. Avis Williams is the New Orleans superintendent, and she reminds us that when you're bringing people together around an issue, there is a difference between buy-in and commitment. In fact, you'll hear her say, if people can buy in, then they can be bought out. Listen for it. She also describes the creation of a joyful educator collaborative where she convenes teachers to learn more about what's going well, as well as areas for continued growth. It's a great episode. Thanks for tuning in. Today on An Imperfect Leader, Dr. Avis Williams is my guest. And Dr. Williams is the superintendent of schools for the NOLA Public Schools in New Orleans, Louisiana, which I think is funny that I've said Louisiana because I think it's the only New Orleans that everybody knows, right? You can have a Springfield in almost every state, but New Orleans is New Orleans. Prior to historic appointment to lead the NOLA Public Schools, Dr. Williams served as superintendent of the historic Selma City Schools in Selma, Alabama for 5 years. An award-winning educator, a sought-after speaker, she's a native of Salisbury, North Carolina. And a product of poverty, Dr. Williams dreamed of becoming a teacher from an early age. And as a first-generation four-year college student, she followed the path of her older siblings and joined the Army right after high school. While in the Army, she was stationed in Fort Jackson, South Carolina, Yongsan, Korea, and Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. And I am certain that segment 2's After Action Review will come naturally to Dr. Williams because the After Action Review process was developed in the military and is used regularly. Dr. Williams, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Well, thank you so much. It is certainly my pleasure to be here.
Avis, what an honor to spend some time with you today. You know, I could have spent the entire time listing your current and past leadership roles in various associations or the many accolades you've received. But what really caught my eye was that you are a leader, certainly, a learner, and an author. And I want to talk about the professional book that you have coming out. But before we do that, I want to ask you about Welcome to Chase Shadows. Yeah. In reading the book, I found real comfort in the characters you created of Jason and Janice and Justin. And it made me wonder this. How much of these experiences are autobiographical? Or maybe what I'm more interested in knowing is how much did you draw on these characters when you started your new position in NOLA? I mean, in the chapter, Just Be Yourself, Jason is starting in a new place and having to take deep breaths and break through his discomfort.
So I wouldn't say it's explicitly autobiographical, but as an author, the characters take on a life of their own. Now, Chase Shadows is the neighborhood that I lived in Huntsville, Alabama. So that's where the name came from. And my younger brother's name is Jason. And there was a character, Bree. My daughter's name is Bree. And so, some of the names and some of the characteristics were based on people that I know. And some of it was loosely based on either my own experiences, but more likely experiences that I've had with young people, because it's about a group of young people who are friends. Jason has a twin sister, Janice, and they're navigating this adolescent space, between dealing with bullies and Stacy and the Mean Girls to understanding social media and some of the dangers of it in The Little White Lie. And so a lot of that was drawn from experiences that I have had with young people. But in terms of my move to NOLA, definitely when you think about being in a new space and just being yourself and connecting with people, that chapter did look a lot like my experience here. And I named it Just Be Yourself because too often when we're in a new space or when we're nervous or feeling anxiety, it's easy to think that we have to conform or present ourselves a certain way in order to be accepted. And so that chapter was about being yourself. And I brought my full self into this job, including my own core values into this job.
It's so interesting that you say that because I have spoken to superintendents around the country and often that advice rings so true. And so in that chapter in particular, right, be yourself. As you enter this new space, really be clearer about who you are and what you value, because if you are trying to be some type of chameleon within a community, then you find yourself pretty stuck when it gets to the point where you have to make a firm decision that is rooted in your values, but is seen as foreign to the community as a whole, because they thought, I thought we were moving in this direction, but it's something different.
And that's too stressful. Who wants to think about which person am I today? Which Avis am I going to be today? Which Avis hat shall I wear today? And as many hats as we wear as superintendents, there is still, for me, a need to be my true, authentic self, regardless of the stakeholders with whom I'm engaging.
Right. There's a difference between understanding the perspectives that people are bringing to a problem and recognizing and trying to empathize, and also being true to who you are. And I imagine this book would be a great book for those who are listening for bibliotherapy within your own schools, because you always have children who are coming, or if you're in an urban district where you have a high mobility rate and children are constantly changing schools, what a great way to welcome someone to say, you're not alone in how you're feeling.
Yeah, and there are reflection questions at the end of each chapter. And I did write it with the idea that it could be used as part of your character curriculum or, small group instruction and that type of thing for elementary and upper elementary grades.
Awesome. I'll put a link to Welcome to Chase Shadows in the show notes. Yeah. I want to follow up, though, with I saw an interview with Axios that you have a professional book for educators coming out. I wonder would you tell us about that book?
Absolutely. So I mentioned my core values earlier. So my core values are equity, excellence, and joy. And when I talk about bringing my whole self, it's about making sure that I'm coming into a space where I can embody those core values. The book is about equity. And the title is The Anti-Racist Roadmap to Equity. And my co-author, Dr. Bryn Elliott, and I started having these amazing conversations during the pandemic. We would meet for Sunday brunch via Zoom. And eventually we started calling them our equity brunches because we were solving all of the world's problems, or at least our community's problems, looking at things through an equity lens. And eventually we said, we need to write a book. So through our conversations and each of us bringing research to the table, we landed at really leaning in to looking at systemic change as it relates to equity work. So what does equity look like from an anti-racist standpoint as a teacher, as a principal, as a superintendent? And what does the curriculum look like? And we used a roadmap analogy, which I'm super excited about. And so we've got our landmarks, which are your basic structures, your general standards and practices that can be supportive. And then we also have roadblocks. What are some barriers? What are some things that may happen along the way that might trip you up, and how do you overcome those? We had shortcuts. We think about this as that low-hanging fruit. How do we get quick wins, even as much as this work really truly is about being consistent and staying the course, there are some things that we can do to get some quick short-term wins. And then we also have rest stops. How do we reflect on our work? How do we pour into ourselves to make sure that we're staying whole and that we're taking good care of ourselves as we do this work? And the book hits the shelves in December, published by ASCD, and we're super excited to be able to share that.
That is super. I will tell you, I love that rich metaphor. I already started thinking about the fact that sometimes you're on the highway, you're going, 60, 70 miles an hour, and then you get to a slowdown period because there's construction, or there's a detour and you've got to take a frontage road that is, parallel to that main highway that, kind of forces you to take this mid-course correction for a moment before you get back on. Oh, what a rich metaphor for the work that we do. And for those who are listening, her co-author, Bren, is actually a guest she was a guest in August. And so she talks about the anti-racist roadmap as well. So what a nice complimentary episode to listen to along with yours. So in the leadership model that I use to advise others, there is a dimension called the leader's learning work. And that's really like the mind of an organization's work. And inside that dimension is this term, system design and systems thinking. Mm-hmm. Now, I read in AASA's School Administrator magazine how when you were in your previous job in Selma City Schools, that you arrived and found the district was in state intervention.
Yes.
Not many people are applying for jobs where they say, oh, it's going to be a lot of work. Yeah, I want that job, right?
Yeah.
And I learned how that under your leadership, the district was released from intervention. It's now recognized as the only district in the state to achieve Tier 2 performance excellence under the Baldrige framework, which is super impressive. And you did this with an intentionality around an attitude that people would need to bring to the work. And certainly you've spoken just a moment ago about your values of equity, excellence, and joy. The title of the article is Leading with Joy as a Prerequisite to Better Outcomes. And you did it by bringing forward strong systems that you could really engage your community, and then it would improve academic and cultural outcomes. So that was a long way of me getting to a question, which is, would you talk about maybe one process? There's so much that obviously went into that, but one process that you used to build such an enduring system in Selma City, one way that you brought stakeholders together.
Yeah, I think the first thing is to understand what stakeholders need. I'm a big believer in getting to a level of belief and commitment. Too often I think we talk about buy-in, and I heard a speaker say once, if you can buy in, you can be bought out. And so we looked at moving from buy-in to commitment and really understanding what people needed in order to be committed to the direction of the district. So I started off by surveying all employees and just learning more about their experience. And what I learned was that morale was low. We had lots of spaces where the culture was toxic. There was a lot of fear involved in terms of not feeling safe at work and also not feeling heard or a sense of belonging at work. And in order for us to move forward in excellence, I had to build positive relationships to get them to a space to where they could actually feel committed to the work. And I did that by forming a transition team. And that team consisted of internal as well as external stakeholders, including our teachers and students and family members. And through that, we established core values for the district, as well as developed a strategic plan that set us on a pathway to excellence. But the bottom line was understanding what people needed to get from buy-in to commitment so that we could embody our theme. And our theme was one team, one voice, committed to excellence. And, we would say that at every convening, and I'd see it posted on walls, and I would hear people talking about it in real time. And then also talking about our core values as a district. And surprisingly enough, equity, excellence, and joy were part of it.
I'm shocked.
Right? Along with students first, teamwork, and integrity. So those were our core values, and I embodied those values and personified those core values to show my commitment. And so the bottom line was it was about making sure that there was clarity around direction as I was building relationships and making sure that people truly felt heard, had a sense of belonging and inclusion, because there's nothing worse than being in a position and you feel like the leadership is doing something to you rather than for you and with you.
I continue to be astounded by the thought that leaders would think that it would be appropriate just to tell people what to do, right? Oh, I believe in shared leadership. I'll tell you what to do, and then you share it with others. It's just, it's so confusing to me. That's not a thing. Exactly. And so what I hear you saying is, look, whether it was in Selma City or then as I transitioned over to NOLA, that it was about including the people most impacted by those decisions inside the system and outside the system, internally, externally. What was it a World Cafe? Was it through surveys? Was it one-on-one conversations? Was it open, office hours? Was it town hall meetings? What was just that one process that you saw that you started to see that shift where, oh, she's serious. These aren't just values that she's written down. She's going to really lead this way.
Yeah, I think people actually saw me addressing the concerns that they put in the survey. And I actually reached out to individuals and had conversations with them. I built relationships. I listened. And so I really do think that the school visits that I made with an intentionality behind connecting with my teachers, as well as with the students and the leaders. And, one of my directors at the time had a mantra that he lived by that I also adopted that said, there are two jobs in education. There are teachers and there are those who support teachers. My teachers knew that I needed them. It wasn't just a thing where I would pull them together to check it off. I absolutely could not have done the work without their commitment to excellence. And so I just did it by really being authentic in terms of the relationship building and the listening that took place.
So that's interesting in terms of the work that you did in Selma. Now you have shifted to another community, probably some similarities, certainly some differences.
Right.
How has your approach changed in NOLA?
Well, it wasn't so much a change. I did have to scale it because obviously New Orleans is larger than Selma. But I still started off with a transition team, still started off knowing that we needed to build a strategic plan. And so we're reimagining a previous strategic plan that was not implemented and looking forward to launching that this fall. But I would say one of the biggest things that I learned in Selma was to value my teachers. And so I'm excited to start the Joyful Educator Collaborative this fall, which will be monthly convenings for our teachers. And the whole purpose is to give them a space so that they can create a sense of community and a sense of belonging and to know how much we appreciate and value them. We've gotten commitments from leaders across the city to ensure that they're pouring in. Larry Nance Jr. with the Pelicans is sponsoring the convenings and really excited about his commitment to our school district. And so just really want to make sure, continuing what I learned in Selma, that valuing teachers has to be a priority. It has to be.
I love it. Last week I had a conversation with Dr. Joe Johnson from the National Center for Urban School Transformation, and that's exactly what he said. If you are not engaging authentically and genuinely with your teachers, then whatever effort it is that you're trying to do just falls into the reform column. And when you are really interested in transformation, when you include your teachers in those decisions, then you really get to these cycles of inquiry and seeing things as possible and being willing to shift to make those mid-course corrections and change your mind on certain things based on their feedback. Yeah, that's really cool. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you?
Well, I think at the end of the day, none of us are perfect. And I think we have to own the fact that we can make mistakes, that we do make mistakes. And I think for me, understanding that the word leader is where you own it. Because if you are a leader, you have to be willing to apologize, be willing to take a step back, to be willing to say, I was wrong. And be willing to just understand that none of us are perfect. And as much as you hold yourself to a high standard, that doesn't mean that you're perfect. And that's something that I had to be real clear about. Excellence is not about perfection. It's about making sure that we're absolutely doing our very best as it relates to the work that we're doing, knowing that we're stronger together and also knowing that we may make mistakes because we're not perfect.
And we'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of An Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR. We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. And my guest is Dr. Avis Williams, Superintendent of the NOLA Public Schools in New Orleans. And in this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they've made, and then we discuss it. So Avis, what happened?
Yeah, so I love this question, first of all, because I do think it's important that leaders reflect on the celebrations that we have, but also be willing to share missteps along the way. And so New Orleans is 100% charter schools. And one of the primary jobs that I have is to be the authorizer of the charter schools. And what that means is when it's time for charter schools to renew, we have decisions that we have to make, and we have a number of metrics that we use around academics, operations, and finance. And it's a really thorough process. And so the mistake that I made was making a decision with the expectation that others who were also leaders would share my decision and would be able to clarify the why, the what, and the steps that were made. That didn't happen. And I take full ownership for the amount of, disappointment and confusion that a lot of our families had in terms of wondering, how did this happen to us? Why did we not know about this? Because the reality of the situation is, as the leader, I should have been more proactive in informing families, not just the school leaders and the people at the school that did not get a contract renewal, but actually connecting with families. Because as I said before, really understanding that we want to make sure that the people who are most impacted are at the table and have an opportunity to voice their concerns and be able to get a clear understanding of why decisions are being made. And I've been on both sides of school closure, so I absolutely understand how stressful it can be and how traumatic it can be.
I do want to, for those who are listening, they may say, wait a second, 100% charter schools? And so, this is post-Katrina decisions, right? And at least the way I understood it. And I wonder if you could just take one quick step back and just kind of explain that scenario or that context for the nation.
Yeah, and charter schools did exist before Hurricane Katrina, but in the aftermath of the hurricane, all schools were closed simply because of the damage. And, there's a lot of healing that's still being done as it relates to Hurricane Katrina, and even a lot of healing as it relates to the school system that we currently have. Because let's be really clear that this is not a model that everybody loves. And some people feel as though it was done to them rather than them having a seat at the table, because it did happen during the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, where, gradually the schools were chartered. And, and that the goal was to improve them. And we've got some bright spots, but we also have a lot of work to do as it relates to just making sure that we're improving outcomes for our scholars. And our accountability framework, that's a driver for me to make decisions about contracts and decisions about compliance issues around accountability. And so we do have over 70 schools, about 43,000 students, and we've got some single site charters, and then we've got some networks. So, one of the things that I really try to pay close attention to is our single sites and making sure that they're supported, because they do have some challenges that some of the networks may not have just because of the resources that they have access to. And so in prepping for the renewal cycle last year, again, I did not not do as much as I should have around engaging families of the schools that were involved in the renewal cycle.
Right. So you become a leader of a very large district with a very big reputation nationwide, lots of eyes on it. And that doesn't probably bother you as much as, or doesn't even enter your mind, because really you're there for children. And what you recognize is, at least the way I understand as you're describing this, is that status quo is not always acceptable. I mean, it is something that is convenient for many, but you're looking at the results and the what you would like to see for children. And what I sense is that you have families who send their children to school. Their children like their teachers and they feel safe at school, and they come home and they talk about their day. But they don't know what's happening is that children may not be achieving as they are capable of, right? That they're not reaching their potential. And as a team and as a leader, you have to make some really difficult decisions about whether or not you're going to renew the contract, which is really a promise with families that their kids are going to thrive in those schools.
Absolutely.
And so you've made a decision about a contract, and that has consequences for families because they now have to find other schools to either apply to or to go to. So it seems to me that may have been one area that was overlooked, or what would you say was sort of an area that was overlooked as we now go through these questions? We know what happened, but what got overlooked?
So what got overlooked for me was the community engagement, the family engagement, and them hearing directly from me in terms of what could happen before it happened. When I talk about the engagement, I'm not talking about after the decision was made. I'm talking about before. If I had it to do all over again, I would have had community meetings at the schools that were up for renewal, and especially those that we had some specific concerns about whether they would be renewed or not. I would have had a community meeting at those schools and given families an opportunity to hear directly from me what the decision-making process, what are the data points that I'm using, what will be the next steps if your school is closed, including the fact that your child or children would then get what we call closing school priority. Because our goal, if we close a school, the goal is that our scholars are going to better schools, because otherwise why put families through that? And so I would have talked to them about that process and made sure that they were armed with all the information that they needed.
Yeah, because in your absence, potentially other narratives are spun,
and especially being new. Keep it in mind, This was done with me being 6 months into a job. Yeah.
So hard.
And so that was part of the piece too, that, came back and I had caught backlash because it was being framed as if this was done poorly because I'm new and didn't understand the district or didn't understand, concepts around the process for renewal, whatever the case may be. But to your point, people can create their own narrative where we're not really intentional about sharing our narrative and sharing our why in the first place.
What did you learn about relationships, or what new relationships were formed as a result of this process?
Well, I think for me, it was really learning more about what the parent experience is like here versus in other constructs where I've worked, in other school districts where I've worked, because there is a difference when you're in a space where you've got your charter school and that charter school has a board, but then you also have a superintendent and a district that has a board, and just understanding the different context that is and what the communication needs to look like in order to engage families. I would say I knocked it out the park overall in terms of community engagement, but I missed the mark for this particular situation. And so, knowing that, absolutely see some things that I could have done differently. I think it did help strengthen some relationships with our partners who help with this work. We've got New Schools of New Orleans that does a lot of partnerships with us. And so, working closely with them in terms of planning engagement, because we're at the renewal season again now, and the whole process is starting over again this fall.
What frustrated you?
I think what frustrated me most is the false narratives that were out there about why and about what I believe I was being framed as a reformer, and I'm using air quotes because it was being used in a really negative way. And people accused me of being bought and paid for and that type of thing. And it was really frustrating for people not to know more about how this decision was actually made, because I followed all of the rules. And this is the thing about being an imperfect leader. You can do everything right and still have a misstep as it relates to your leadership, because I did everything right. There's nobody that could have looked at a policy, a procedure, a contractual agreement, or anything else and say, well, you didn't do this because I did everything right. I just didn't do it well.
And it's so heartening, though, for someone who is known nationally, that you're willing to also lead vulnerably, right? To say, in the sense that I will be vulnerable in accepting where I could have done things better. And Absolutely. I think that certainly speaks to one's leadership capacity. Yeah. What could you have done differently? So, I asked what got overlooked, and so that there's sometimes a difference. Sometimes it's system wide, and then there's sometimes that it's sort of a personal decision about what you could have done differently.
Yeah. So what I could have done differently is had more clarity on the front end of the decision-making process. And that's something that we're doing this year. So we already have identified dates to do community meetings so that all of the schools that are up for renewal, and particularly those that are in the comprehensive evaluation process, meaning that you've got to go through some additional steps before we determine whether your contract will be renewed outright or renewed with contingencies. So we're going to have community meetings where I'm going to be able to speak to the process of what could happen, the various scenarios that could happen. I'm going to be able to speak to the data points that we use to make the decisions and the timelines so families know exactly what to expect. Another piece, too, is my accountability team has meetings with the school leaders as well as their board chairs. And this year I'm participating in those meetings. And that's another thing I could have done differently, is been more involved in the front-facing part of the process rather than just the decision maker. I don't want to be the Wizard of Oz, behind the curtain.
Right. Well, it gives you the opportunity to really engage, to say, I want you to be successful.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. Exactly. And so I'm here to be every part of your success.
Absolutely.
As opposed to just being the deciding factor. That
Absolutely. Because we're in the process of, we have a 5-year portfolio plan where we're looking at how do we make our schools more robust, make our portfolio of schools more robust. And one thing that I've said over and over again is we cannot close our way to better quality schools. And I mean that. And I'm committed to working with our school leaders and their boards and our families and community leaders to make sure that we're doing all we can for our schools to be successful.
In the end, what was something that was good that came out of the experience?
Well, I think in the end, just for me personally, it was learning some of the hidden culture within our ecosystem of our school system, and that was good because sometimes things can stay as an undercurrent for a very long time, and it's happening, and you don't know it's happening, whatever it is. But this was an opportunity for me to get more of a bird's eye view of some of the pieces within our ecosystem that I might not have experienced otherwise, because I could have gone through that process and this not happen. If that school had not been closed, if I had not made that decision, then the whole process would have looked totally different. And there are things that I would not have learned that I can now employ as I move through that process for this upcoming school year. Yeah,
it sounds like you really unearthed to some extent the mental models that individuals might have been using or community leaders were using as a way to sort of create their narrative about whether a school was being successful or not, regardless of the fact that you had these documents to say, well, here are all the benchmarks and we don't seem to be meeting them. So that's really interesting. What advice would you give to an aspiring leader?
So one thing that I always say is it's not lonely at the top. If you are lonely at the top, that is your choice. And what I mean by that is find your tribe. We know that there are about 70% of superintendents, 70% of teachers are women. When you get to the superintendent level, that number decreases significantly, and only 1.4% of our nation's superintendents are Black women. And I'm committed to making sure that I'm connecting with all of my sister soups, and we've got a WhatsApp group that we formed, and I've connected with over 80 Black female superintendents, and we support each other. And even before we started doing the larger connection, I had colleagues, trusted colleagues and mentors that I trusted to give me advice or just to be a sounding board. And then I do that for other people. We have to pay it forward and continue to pay it forward by doing that for other people. This job is amazing. And if you're lonely, then you're not doing it right. And there are things that you need to really take a closer look at in terms of how you engage with your colleagues and how you make yourself available as a mentor for others.
My guest again today was Dr. Avis Williams, Superintendent of the NOLA Public Schools in New Orleans. And Avis, I got to tell you, what a joy. In fact, my Hebrew name is Simcha, which means joy. So when I read your article, I went, lead with Simcha,
Nice.
But what a joy to have spent time with you to learn more about equity, excellence, joy, that these are clearly not just words, but the way they are every fiber of your being. And the fact that I take away today about including people who are most impacted by decisions, being present, and being thoughtful about the decisions that we make. And I love this idea of a joyful education collaborative that really will bring people together, and they will continue to see you and respect you and just be so pleased and grateful to have you as their leader. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created the Daruma doll butterfly artwork. Imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It is a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. And I'm proud to be an imperfect leader, so I hope you'll join me next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, Leadership in After Action. Imperfect leaders. Are you facing challenges filling open speech-language pathologist positions within your district? It's kind of a silly question because I know you are. MPAT Speech understands the critical need for qualified professionals in your schools. They recognize that communication lies at the heart of academic success, and that's why they're dedicated to helping you bridge the gap by offering expert therapists and innovative telehealth solutions. Don't let open positions hinder your students' success. Partner with MPAT Speech today and ensure every child in your district has access to the speech therapy they deserve. MPAT Speech, EMPAT Speech.com. Empowering students, empowering schools.